Late in the evening, the big store was almost empty, and the long bright lights made the shiny floor look like glass while soft music floated gently through the air, creating a calm feeling that hid the quiet tension inside the building. And a man in simple clothes walked in slowly, keeping his head low and his hands in his pockets, so no one would notice him, and no one knew that this quiet man was the real owner and CEO of the entire company, because he had chosen to come undercover to see the truth with his own eyes and not the fake reports he usually read in his office. And as he stepped past the automatic doors, he breathed in deeply, smelling the clean air mixed with soap and dust, and he looked around at the shelves full of products, standing neatly like soldiers waiting for customers, and he watched the few workers still moving around finishing their shifts, and he felt proud of what he had built, but also curious about what he might discover tonight. And his footsteps were soft as he walked slowly, pretending to be a normal late shopper, and he picked up a random item just to blend in and placed it back carefully. And then as he turned near the cleaning aisle, something caught his eye and made his body pause without him even thinking about it, because near the corner by the mops and cleaning carts, a janitor was sitting on a small chair with his shoulders bent forward and his head low, and his hands were moving near his face. And when the CEO looked closer, he realized the man was wiping tears from his eyes, and the sight felt strange and heavy, because people usually cried at home, not at work, not in a quiet store late at night. And the CEO felt a small tight pull in his chest and slowed his steps even more, trying not to make noise, and he pretended to study a shelf nearby while watching the janitor from the side. And the janitor looked tired, but not just tired, he looked broken, like something inside him was hurting deeply, and his uniform was slightly worn, and his shoes had marks from many long days of hard work. And the CEO wondered what kind of pain could push a grown man to cry alone in a public place, and he felt a strong urge to walk away and respect the man's privacy. But something inside him said this moment was important, and he should not ignore it. And the store felt even quieter now, and the music sounded distant, like it was coming from far away. And suddenly the janitor lifted his head quickly and looked around with wide, nervous eyes, like someone afraid of being caught doing something wrong. And he quickly wiped his face with his sleeve and stood up straight, trying to look normal. And he grabbed the handle of his cleaning cart tightly and pushed it a few steps, as if pretending to work. And the CEO felt his heartbeat grow faster, because fear was not normal for a man simply cleaning a store. And the CEO could sense that something was being hidden, something heavy and dangerous, like a secret buried too deep. And he took a slow step forward and then stopped again, watching the janitor's movements carefully. And the janitor kept glancing over his shoulder, and his breathing looked uneven, and his hands shook slightly. And the CEO felt his curiosity grow stronger, mixed with concern, and he thought about all the workers in his company and wondered if they were truly safe and respected, or if some dark corners existed that he had never seen. And he remembered how numbers and reports could never show real human pain, and he felt a small wave of guilt for trusting papers more than people. And the smell of floor cleaner drifted through the air, and the lights hummed softly above them, and the CEO felt like time had slowed down, and every small movement felt louder than it should be. And the janitor suddenly stopped moving and leaned against the cart for support, as if his legs were weak. And he closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath, like he was trying to control strong emotions. And the CEO could not ignore it anymore, and his heart told him this man needed help, or at least someone to listen. And yet he also felt cautious, because stepping into a stranger's private pain could bring trouble or danger. And he reminded himself to stay calm and act like a normal customer, and not reveal who really was. And he slowly walked a little closer, making light footsteps. And he noticed the janitor's eyes were red and wet, and his face carried lines of stress that spoke of long struggles and silent worries, and the CEO felt a quiet respect for this man who worked hard behind the scenes, unseen by most people, and he wondered about the janitor's life, his family, his dreams, and what kind of story had led him to this lonely moment in a quiet store. And the store air felt heavy, now filled with unsaid words and hidden emotions, and the CEO felt like he was standing at the edge of something important, something that could change more than just one life. And the janitor suddenly looked toward him, and their eyes met for a brief second, and the janitor quickly looked away as if ashamed or afraid. And the CEO gave a small, gentle smile, hoping to appear friendly and harmless, and the janitor relaxed slightly but still looked tense, and the CEO's mind raced with questions. Was someone hurting this man? Was there unfair treatment? Was there fear in this workplace that should never exist? And he felt a growing responsibility inside him, not just as a human being, but as the owner of this place. And the music in the store changed to a slower tune, and the soft sound seemed to match the slow, heavy thoughts in his mind, and he took another step closer and pretended to read a product label while thinking about what to say and how to say it without making the janitor uncomfortable or scared. And the janitor wiped his face again quickly and adjusted his cap and pushed the cart forward, but his movements were stiff and unsure, like someone pretending to be okay when they were not. And the CEO could feel the tension in the air like a thin thread ready to snap, and he felt his pulse in his ears and a strange mix of fear and determination in his heart. And he realized this simple visit had already turned into something much deeper than he expected. And he thought about walking away and letting things stay hidden, but the image of the janitor's tears stayed strong in his mind, and he knew he could not ignore it. And he whispered quietly to himself that sometimes truth hides in small silent moments, and brave people must be willing to face it. And the store felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. And the janitor paused again and leaned slightly forward, resting his hands on the cart, and the CEO noticed a small teardrop fall onto the shiny floor and quickly disappear under the bright light. And that tiny moment pushed the CEO's heart even harder, and he knew something was very wrong, and he felt a strong need to protect this man, even without knowing the full story. And he prepared himself to speak, but hesitated one last time, making sure his voice would sound calm and kind and not threatening. And the janitor looked around once more, as if afraid someone else might appear, and his shoulders tightened again, and the CEO felt the weight of the moment pressing on his chest. And he understood that whatever secret was hiding behind those tears could change everything he believed about his company and the people running it. And he felt both nervous and ready, because sometimes the hardest truths arrive quietly in places no one expects. And as the store lights continued to shine and the soft music played on, the CEO stood there, watching the janitor with deep concern and a rising sense of duty. And one powerful question echoed in his mind again and again. What was this man hiding, and why was he so afraid to let anyone see his pain? The CEO stayed still for a moment, letting his thoughts settle, while the quiet store seemed to stretch time into slow, soft breaths. And the janitor kept moving the cleaning cart back and forth, pretending to wipe an already clean floor, but his eyes kept darting toward the empty aisles like shadows might jump out at any second. And the CEO knew this fear was real, not imagined, and he gently cleared his throat to make a small harmless sound so the janitor would not be startled. And when the janitor turned his head, the CEO offered a soft, friendly smile and spoke in a calm voice, asking if everything was all right. And the janitor froze for a second, as if his body forgot how to move, and then forced a thin smile that did not reach his eyes, and replied that he was fine, just tired from a long shift. And his voice sounded tight and weak, like he was holding back more emotion. And the CEO nodded slowly, pretending to accept the answer, but his heart told him the truth was still hidden. And he casually picked up a nearby product and looked at it as if comparing prices while keeping his tone light, and said that long hours could be heavy on the body and mind, and sometimes even strong people needed rest. And the janitor swallowed hard and looked down at the floor and tightened his grip on the cart handle, and the CEO noticed a small shake in the man's hands and felt a deeper concern grow inside him, and he took a careful step closer, keeping a respectful distance, and said in a gentle way that sometimes talking to a stranger could feel easier than talking to people who knew you, and that he was just passing through and had no reason to judge. And the janitor's eyes lifted slightly and met the CEO's face for a brief moment, and in that short glance the CEO saw pain, fear, and a quiet hope mixed together like a storm trapped behind tired eyes. And the janitor quickly looked away again and whispered that he really should not say anything, because trouble always followed words, and that silence was safer. And the CEO felt those words sink deep into his chest, because fear should never rule a workplace, and he calmly replied that safety mattered and no one deserved to feel scared just for speaking honestly. And he kept his voice slow and steady like warm air trying to melt ice. And the janitor took a long breath and leaned slightly against the cart, as if the weight inside him was becoming too heavy to hold alone. And he said in a low voice that some people in charge did not treat workers kindly, and that mistakes were blamed unfairly, and hours were cut without warning, and respect was missing, and dignity was fading day by day. And the CEO listened carefully without interrupting, keeping his face neutral even though inside his emotions were rising like waves. And the janitor continued, slowly choosing each word carefully, as if afraid the walls themselves might hear him. And he explained that workers were warned not to complain, and those who tried were given harder shifts or silent threats, and sometimes schedules were changed, suddenly making life at home harder for families. And the janitor said he had tried to stay quiet and endure it for months, but tonight something had happened that pushed his heart beyond its limit, and tears came again to his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away. And the CEO gently asked what had happened tonight, and the janitor hesitated, biting his lip and looking around again before whispering that a supervisor had accused him of damaging expensive equipment. Even though he had proof, he did not touch it, and he was told the cost might be taken from his pay, and that one more mistake could cost him his job. And the janitor's voice cracked slightly, and he said he had children waiting at home and rent due soon, and losing his job would mean losing everything he worked for. And the CEO felt a sharp pain in his chest, because no worker should carry such fear, especially for something they did not do. And he wanted to reveal who he really was right then. But he knew patience was important to understand the full truth and protect the janitor from possible harm. And he nodded slowly and thanked the janitor for trusting him, and said that no one deserved to be treated like that. And the janitor looked surprised by the kindness in the stranger's voice and relaxed just a little. And the CEO asked softly if others were facing the same problem, and the janitor nodded and said many workers whispered similar stories in break rooms and corners, but everyone was too afraid to speak openly. And the fear felt like a heavy shadow hanging over the store, and the CEO felt anger rise quietly inside him, but kept his face calm. And he asked if any proof existed, and the janitor said some workers kept messages, schedules, and notes, but were afraid to share them. And the CEO thanked them again and said sometimes change began with one brave voice. And the janitor gave a weak, sad smile and said bravery felt expensive when you had a family depending on you. And the CEO understood that deeply and promised nothing but kindness and respect, and told the janitor to take care of himself tonight and rest when he could. And the janitor nodded, grateful but still worried, and pushed his cart away, slowly returning to his duties. And the CEO stood there, watching him go, feeling the weight of responsibility settle firmly on his shoulders. And he realized this undercover visit had opened a door to a hidden world of quiet suffering that reports never showed. And he slowly walked toward the exit, pretending to browse a few more shelves while his mind worked fast, connecting every word he had heard and every fear he had seen, and he knew he could not ignore this because real leadership meant protecting people, not just profits. And as he stepped outside into the cool night air, he felt a strong determination form inside him like a silent promise, and he looked back through the glass doors at the bright store lights and the small moving figure of the janitor, and he knew this was only the beginning, and that the truth waiting ahead might be heavier than he imagined. But he was ready to face it because justice mattered more than comfort and silence. And as the doors closed behind him, the quiet hum of the store faded, but the echo of the janitor's trembling voice stayed loud in his heart, pushing him forward toward action and change. The next morning, the CEO woke up earlier than usual with the memory of the janitor's tired eyes and shaking hands still fresh in his mind, and the soft morning light filled his room, but his thoughts were already busy planning his next steps. Because once truth showed its face, it could not be ignored, and he dressed in simple clothes again, choosing comfort over status, and decided to return to the store quietly without drawing attention. And as he drove through the calm streets, he replayed every word the janitor had said, trying to separate emotion from fact, while respecting the pain behind the story. And he reminded himself that careful proof was needed before any strong action could be taken, because rushing without full understanding could harm innocent people and protect the guilty ones. And when he arrived at the store, the early shift was just beginning, and a few workers were opening doors, arranging shelves, and greeting the first customers, and the air felt fresh and hopeful compared to the heavy feeling of the night before. And he walked inside, blending into the quiet flow of morning activity, and he noticed how workers moved quickly but avoided eye contact with supervisors, and how small signs of tension showed in stiff shoulders and forced smiles. And he began to observe silently, like a shadow, listening to the language of behavior instead of words. And he stood near a shelf, pretending to read labels, while watching how instructions were given and how mistakes were handled. And he noticed one young worker being corrected sharply for a small error, even though her hands were clearly full, and the tone used felt cold and impatient rather than supportive. And the CEO felt a slow tightening inside his chest, because respect should never be optional. And he continued moving slowly through the store, watching more small moments add together like puzzle pieces, forming a clear picture. And during a short break time, he sat on a bench near the staff area, pretending to check his phone while quietly listening to two workers speaking in low voices, and they talked about sudden schedule changes, missed payments, and unfair warnings, and their words matched the janitor's story almost exactly. And the CEO felt both sadness and quiet anger, because the problem was not isolated. It was spreading like a silent sickness, and he knew deeper proof was needed to protect the workers fully. And later that day, he visited another section of the store and overheard a supervisor reminding workers the complaints caused trouble, and that loyal workers stayed quiet and did their job without questions. And the CEO felt his jaw tighten, because fear was being used as a tool and leadership had turned into control. And he made a mental note of every face, voice, and pattern, and slowly built a clear understanding of how power was being misused behind friendly public smiles. And once his observations felt complete for the day, he left the store calmly and drove to his private office where no one would disturb him. And he opened secure internal systems that allowed him to review work schedules, payment logs, complaint records, and camera times. And as he compared digital records with what workers had described, he saw gaps, mismatches, and strange changes that did not follow company policy. And he saw overtime hours missing from records and sudden schedule edits without approval notes, and warning reports filed without clear reasons. And his heart sank, because the evidence was real, not imagined, and the janitor's tears now had solid proof behind them. And the CEO leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of responsibility press harder than any business deal ever had. And he reminded himself that leadership was not about comfort. It was about courage and fairness and protection of those who trusted the company with their time and energy, and he knew he needed more. Direct confirmation from workers, but without putting them in danger, and so he planned to continue undercover. Visits at different times in different sections, creating a wider view of the truth, and over the next few days, he returned again and again, blending into the background, speaking casually to workers as a friendly stranger asking simple, harmless questions about how long they worked, what they enjoyed, and what they wished could improve. And slowly bits of truth came out like drops of rain forming a river, and stories of pressure, fear, unfair blame, and silent suffering repeated themselves in different voices and faces, and the CEO felt both grateful for their honesty and heavy with sadness that such fear had grown under his leadership without his knowledge. And one afternoon he saw the same janitor from the first night pushing his cart near the entrance, and the man looked tired but calmer, and when their eyes met, the janitor gave a small unsure nod, recognizing the stranger who had listened to him, and the CEO returned the nod quietly with respect, and the moment strengthened his determination even more, because this was no longer just a problem. On paper, it had a human face and real pain, and that evening the CEO returned to his office and carefully saved copies of reports, schedules, and footage in a secure private file, so no one could erase the evidence. And he wrote detailed notes about every pattern, every name, every shift change, and every unfair warning, and his mind stayed sharp and focused like a steady flame burning through darkness. And he knew that when the time came, truth would need to stand strong and clear, without doubt and without fear. And as the days passed, he began to see how deeply the culture had been damaged, and how some supervisors had grown comfortable using power without accountability, and how silence had allowed harm to grow unnoticed. And he felt a strong mix of regret and resolve, because he could not change the past, but he could protect the future. And late one night, as he sat alone in his office, looking at the city lights through the window, he thought about the janitor sitting alone, wiping tears in a quiet store, and how one small moment had opened a door to hidden truth. And he realized that sometimes the greatest warnings come softly, not loudly, and only those who choose to look closely can see them. And he promised himself that the workers would not suffer in silence anymore, and that justice would come not with anger, but with fairness, clarity, and strong action. And as he closed his laptop and prepared to leave, he felt calm but firm, like a storm that had decided its direction. And he knew the next step would bring confrontation, truth, and change. And that once the truth was revealed, nothing would remain the same again. The following week began quietly on the surface, but inside the CEO's mind, everything was moving fast like pieces on a chessboard, and every decision had to be careful and precise, because one wrong move could warn the wrong people and cause evidence to disappear or workers to face silent punishment. And so he continued his undercover visits, mixing different times, mornings, afternoons, and late evenings, so no pattern could be noticed. And each visit added another layer of understanding to the hidden system operating inside his own company. And he watched how certain supervisors always stayed close to the office areas, while others controlled the floor with sharp eyes and strict voices. And he noticed how workers straightened their backs and lowered their voices whenever these supervisors walked by, and how laughter disappeared suddenly like air pulled from a room. And these small changes spoke louder than any report. And the CEO kept his calm mask, while inside his emotions slowly grew stronger but more controlled, because anger without direction could destroy justice, and he wanted truth, not revenge. And one afternoon he noticed a young worker being sent home early without explanation, and later he quietly asked another worker why, and the answer came in a soft, nervous whisper that the young worker had questioned a sudden schedule change the night before. And the CEO felt his heart tighten, because punishment was being used as a warning to others, and fear was spreading like an invisible fog. And he carefully wrote the detail into his phone pretending to type a message while actually saving the moment in his private notes. And later that day, he sat near the break area listening as workers spoke about missing overtime pay and how complaints never reached higher management because forms disappeared and emails went unanswered, and the CEO realized that the system had been quietly blocked at multiple levels, making workers feel trapped and powerless. And this discovery pushed his concern deeper because it showed planning, not accident, and he knew the truth was larger than one or two bad decisions, and that a culture of silence had grown roots and needed strong light to be removed. And that evening he returned to his office and reviewed more internal logs and found that complaint records had been edited and closed without investigation, and digital timestamps had been changed by accounts linked to certain supervisors. And the CEO felt a cold calm settle over him because the evidence was now strong and clear enough to support serious action, and he secured copies of everything, once again storing them in protected systems beyond internal access, and added detailed written timelines connecting behaviors to digital proof. And the story forming before him was no longer just emotional. It was factual and structured and ready to stand against denial and excuses. And still, he wanted one more layer of confirmation from outside the store management structure to make sure the truth could not be twisted later. And so he contacted a trusted external auditor, quietly requesting a routine-style review without revealing his personal involvement, and arranged for data verification under confidentiality. And while waiting for that process, he continued to observe the human side of the situation, because numbers alone could not show the real damage caused by fear and pressure. And one evening he saw the janitor again working near the back aisle, and the man's movements were slow and careful, and his face looked tired but calmer than before. And the CEO watched quietly as another supervisor walked past and spoke sharply about a small wet spot on the floor, and the janitor quickly apologized, even though the area had just been cleaned. And the CEO noticed the supervisor's tone carried power and warning rather than guidance, and the janitor's shoulders tightened immediately, and his eyes lowered, and the CEO felt a deep sense of sadness and protective anger, because no human deserved to live in constant fear while simply doing honest work. And he knew that the longer this continued, the deeper the emotional damage would become, and he silently promised himself again that this would end soon, and that no worker would be punished for speaking truth once the light was turned on. And over the next 2 days, the external auditor confirmed irregular data patterns matching the CEO's findings, which strengthened the case even more. And the CEO felt steady and confident now, because the truth was supported from every direction, and all that remained was choosing the right moment and method to reveal it publicly and safely. And he carefully planned a meeting that would bring all supervisors and key staff together without raising suspicion, and he framed it as a routine performance review and future planning session to avoid panic or evidence hiding. And he instructed his assistant to arrange schedules quietly and normally, and prepared a clear presentation of facts, timelines, and policy violations without emotional language, because truth spoken calmly carries more power than anger. And during the final night before the meeting, he sat alone in his office, reviewing everything one last time and thinking about the faces he had seen, the tired eyes, the forced smiles, the shaking hands, and the silent fear hiding behind everyday work. And he reminded himself that leadership meant standing between power and the vulnerable, and that silence allowed harm to grow and courage allowed healing to begin. And as the city lights reflected against his window, he felt calm, ready, and steady like a mountain before a storm. And he knew that the next day would change many lives, and perhaps the company's future direction forever. And he hoped that justice would not only correct wrong actions, but also rebuild trust and dignity for every worker who had suffered quietly. And he closed his files gently and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility balanced by the clarity of truth and the quiet strength of purpose. and he left the office with a firm, steady step, knowing that the hidden chapter of fear was about to end, and a new chapter of fairness was about to begin. The morning of the meeting arrived with a quiet tension that could not be seen, but could be felt like the air before heavy rain, and the CEO woke early feeling calm but deeply focused because today, truth would step into the open and silence would finally break, and he dressed neatly in his professional suit. Once again, no longer hiding behind simple clothes because it was time for his real role to speak clearly. And when he arrived at the company building, the halls looked normal with workers greeting each other and phones ringing softly, but beneath the surface, many unseen stories waited for justice, and he walked into the main conference room where long tables were arranged neatly and screens stood ready for presentation, and one by one, the supervisors, managers, and department heads entered the room carrying notebooks, cups of coffee, and confident expressions. Unaware of what was about to unfold, and polite greetings filled the room, and small talk floated through the air. But the CEO watched quietly, noticing familiar faces from his undercover visits and remembering sharp voices and fearful reactions. And the meeting began normally with short updates and future plans discussed calmly, and everything appeared ordinary and safe, and that false calm made the coming truth even heavier. And when the time felt right, the CEO stood slowly and the room fell silent immediately because everyone respected his authority, and he looked around the room, making calm, steady eye contact with each person and spoke in a clear, balanced voice, saying that before moving forward, he wanted to address an important internal matter that affected the heart of the company, and the room shifted slightly with curiosity and mild concern, and the CEO pressed a button and the screen behind him lit up showing charts, timelines, and records, and he began explaining patterns of missing overtime pay, sudden schedule changes, unfair warning reports, and edited complaint records, and his voice remained calm and steady, but each fact landed like a quiet hammer, striking truth into the room, and some supervisors shifted in their seats while others stared at the screen with tightening expressions, and the CEO continued presenting real examples matched with policy rules, showing exactly how company standards had been violated and how worker trust had been broken. And as the evidence built layer by layer, a thick tension filled the room, and silence replaced the earlier casual talk, and the CEO then revealed that these findings were confirmed through undercover observation and independent audit verification, and a wave of shock moved across the room because the idea that the CEO himself had been walking among workers unseen felt unreal and powerful, and some faces turned pale while others avoided eye contact, and the CEO calmly explained how he had seen fear in workers' eyes, heard whispers of pressure, and witnessed unfair treatment firsthand, and he spoke about the emotional damage that fear caused not just to individuals, but to the culture of the company, and the room felt heavy. And still, like time had slowed, and everyone was holding their breath, and then the CEO addressed accountability, directly stating that leadership existed to protect and guide, not control and threaten, and that any misuse of power would never be tolerated. And he named specific policy violations, without personal attacks, keeping the focus on actions and responsibility. And when he finished speaking, he paused, allowing the truth to settle deeply into the room, and the silence felt loud and uncomfortable. And then one supervisor attempted to speak, defensively claiming misunderstandings and blaming system errors, but the CEO calmly responded with clear proof, matching digital records to behavior patterns, leaving no room for denial, and the supervisor slowly sank back into his chair, realizing the truth could not be escaped, and the room remained silent again, and the CEO then announced that immediate corrective action would take place, including removal of those responsible from leadership roles, pending formal review and restructuring of reporting systems to protect workers and restore trust. And a wave of mixed emotion moved through the room, shock, fear, relief, and uncertainty blending together, and the CEO emphasized that this was not about punishment alone, but about rebuilding fairness, transparency, and dignity, and that every worker deserved to feel safe, respected, and valued. And he explained new anonymous reporting systems, open communication policies, and leadership training that would follow, and that retaliation would be strictly prohibited and monitored. And he encouraged honest feedback and reminded everyone that integrity defined true success, not numbers alone. And as the meeting ended, the supervisors left the room quietly, many lost in thought, some humbled and others shaken by the exposure of truth. And the CEO remained standing for a moment, breathing, slowly feeling the emotional weight release, slightly, because justice had taken its first visible step. And later that afternoon, word spread through the store that major changes were happening, and workers whispered with cautious hope and disbelief. And the janitor heard fragments of the news while cleaning near the staff area, and his heart began to beat faster with mixed fear and curiosity. And when the CEO later walked through the store, openly wearing his business suit, the janitor recognized him immediately and froze in shock, realizing the kind stranger from that quiet night was the powerful leader of the entire company. And their eyes met across the aisle, and the CEO gave a gentle, respectful nod and a small, reassuring smile, and the janitor felt a wave of emotion rush through him: disbelief, gratitude, relief, and quiet pride. And tears filled his eyes again, but this time they were not tears of fear. They were tears of hope, and he understood that his pain had been heard and his courage had mattered. And the atmosphere in the store slowly shifted as supervisors spoke more carefully, and workers stood a little taller and smiled more freely, and a soft feeling of safety began to grow where fear once lived. And the CEO walked slowly through the aisles, observing the change already starting, and he felt calm, steady satisfaction, not pride, but quiet peace, knowing the truth had opened a door to healing and fairness. And as the day came to an end, he looked back once more at the store floor filled with ordinary people doing honest work, and he reminded himself that leadership was a daily responsibility, not a title, and that listening mattered as much as speaking, and that sometimes the greatest changes begin with one quiet moment of care in an empty store, and one brave heart willing to tell the truth. The days after the meeting felt different, like the air inside the store had been cleaned by fresh wind. And even though not everything changed overnight, gentle sense of relief began to flow through the halls and aisles, and workers moved with a little more ease in their steps and a little more light in their faces, and conversations sounded softer and kinder instead of tense and whispered. And the CEO continued visiting the store regularly, sometimes openly and sometimes quietly, just to observe and make sure the promises spoken in the meeting were turning into real action and not empty words. And new temporary supervisors were assigned, while permanent leadership changes were carefully reviewed, and every shift schedule was checked again to correct unfair cuts and missing hours. And workers were encouraged to report problems freely without fear, and a secure anonymous system was launched so voices could be heard safely and clearly. And slowly trust began to rebuild like small green plants, pushing through hard soil. And the janitor returned to his normal routine with a lighter heart and stronger confidence. And even though the memories of fear had not fully faded, he felt hope growing again inside him. And he noticed how supervisors now spoke with respect and patience, and how small mistakes were handled with guidance instead of blame, and how smiles began to appear naturally instead of forced. And the janitor felt proud that his quiet honesty had helped bring light into a dark place. And one afternoon, the CEO asked the store manager to gather workers for a short informal talk. And when everyone gathered, the CEO spoke warmly, thanking them for their dedication, patience, and courage during a difficult time. And he reminded them that the company belonged to everyone who worked honestly inside it, and that safety, respect, and fairness would always come first. And his voice carried sincerity, not authority, and workers felt seen and valued in a way they had not felt before. and the janitor stood among them listening carefully and feeling a strong sense of belonging grow inside his chest. And later that day, the CEO personally approached the janitor with a gentle, respectful tone and thanked him for trusting a stranger and for speaking truth when it was difficult. And the janitor felt emotional but stood tall and thanked the CEO for listening and caring, and they shared a simple handshake filled with mutual respect and understanding, and the CEO quietly offered support for any future needs and encouraged the janitor to continue growing with confidence. And the janitor walked away feeling stronger than he had in many years, and the store continued improving day by day with clearer communication, fair schedules, honest leadership, and stronger teamwork. And laughter slowly returned to break rooms and aisles, and fear slowly faded into memory. And the CEO felt proud not of himself, but of the people who chose courage over silence and honesty over comfort. And he reminded himself that leadership was not a one-time action, but a daily promise to protect and uplift. And as weeks passed, the store became a place of safety and trust again, and the janitor worked with renewed energy and peace, knowing his voice mattered, and his future felt secure and hopeful. And the CEO continued monitoring, quietly ensuring that fairness remained strong and that respect stayed rooted deep in the culture. And he carried the lesson of that quiet night forever, remembering that sometimes the smallest moment can awaken the greatest change, and that true leadership listens before it speaks and protects before it commands, and values people above all else. And in this renewed environment, the company began to grow not only in success but in heart and humanity, and the story of fear slowly transformed into a story of strength, trust, and new beginnings for everyone involved.